My ability to see glimpses of the future had always set me apart. For as long as I can remember, these brief flashes of events yet to come had given me an almost unfair advantage. I always seemed to know what was going to happen, from small things like when it would rain, to more major events like acing a test I hadn't studied for. But this gift also made me feel isolated, like I was living just slightly out of sync from everyone else around me. My family in particular had always seen my foresight as unsettling. When I was younger, I would excitedly tell my parents or my younger brother Ethan about something that was going to happen, relishing my chance to astonish them. But rather than impressing them, my predictions were met with unease and suspicion. "How could you possibly know that?" my mother would invariably ask, or my father would shake his head and warn, "Don't speak of such nonsense." Intentions good, I learned to keep the things I saw largely to myself. My brother Ethan, on the other hand, blossomed under the praise and accolades that constantly came his way. The star athlete, top of his academics, socially at ease. He was everything my parents had hoped for in a son. "We're so proud of you," my parents would effuse as they patted Ethan on the back after yet another trophy or award ceremony. Meanwhile, I faded into the background, the strange daughter with her unusual talents that were seen as quirky at best. I didn't mind, though. My visions enabled me to help my family avoid several close disasters over the years, like the time when I was 12 and saw that my mom was going to slip on a wet kitchen floor and break her hip, so I made sure to clean up spilled milk right away. Or when I foresaw my dad getting laid off from his engineering job when I was 15, allowing us to financially prepare in advance. When I told my parents what I had prevented through my ability to glimpse ahead, they would simply nod, rarely acknowledging the catastrophe I had helped divert. Yes, that spill could have been bad," my mom would murmur. Or at most, my father would give a perfunctory, "Thank you, Iris. That layoff might have been difficult." But within days, it would be forgotten. I learned to take satisfaction in protecting my family behind the scenes through the quiet interventions my foresight allowed. At least I was using this unusual power for good, even if nobody fully appreciated it. My brother's star continued to rise, now with the founding of his highly successful tech startup right after college. But a quiet pride stirred in me from knowing I held something special, something that allowed me to shape the future, even just by degrees. I had hopes that one day, my family might finally recognize that value too. My brother Ethan's startup went from strength to strength over the next few years. His company developed groundbreaking AI technology and apps, catapulting my little brother to fame and fortune in the highly competitive tech world before he even turned 25. I watched from the sidelines as he gave talks at conferences across the world, his innovative projects and savvy business sense earning him accolades and buzz. But over time, his success also stoked an arrogance in Ethan that distanced him from our family. He grew increasingly dismissive towards me, rolling his eyes exaggeratedly whenever I offered advice about decisions he was contemplating with his company. "Iris, please, you may have gotten lucky a few times helping Mom avoid some minor accidents, but I hardly need your supernatural advice about actual business," he scoffed. So, when I had a startlingly vivid vision showing clear evidence of financial misconduct among some of the top managers at Ethan's company, I hesitated before telling him. But my concern over the potentially catastrophic embezzlement I foresaw happening under his nose ultimately convinced me to speak up. Ethan, however, grew impatient as I revealed what I had seen. "You must be mistaken. My finance team and VPs are like family. I'd trust them with my life," he interrupted me. "I appreciate your concern, Iris, but I've got everything under control." I tried to interject with more details from my vision, but he held up a hand. "Please, enough. I'm sure your intentions are good, but this company is my baby. I think I can manage it just fine without any psychic premonitions." The dismissiveness in his voice stung, but I knew nothing else I said would get through. Still, I hoped I was wrong, and that perhaps Ethan's stellar business judgment would prevail. But a few months later, my worst fears were realized as a massive financial scandal rocked Ethan's startup. The embezzlement scheme I had foreseen ended up funneling huge sums right under Ethan's oblivious watch, as I watched the fallout nearly bring Ethan's decade of work implode overnight. I couldn't help but wish he had listened. The months after the scandal nearly destroyed Ethan's company were rocky for our family. My brother became moodier than ever, barely present even when he did join my parents and I for dinner or holidays. The golden child luster had worn off, with Ethan's wounded pride keeping him from seeking comfort and support even from us. I had started my master's degree in business analytics at that time, hoping to find ways to apply my gift more substantially. My advisor, Mr. Grayson, was renowned in the field, his unconventional thinking valued across industries. During one mentoring session, I found myself opening up to him about my unusual ability. To my surprise, his eyes lit up with fascination rather than unease. "My dear, that could be invaluable for a strategic forecaster," he exclaimed. "In fact, I have someone I'd love to introduce you to, a former student of mine named Alexander who has extraordinarily accurate predictive abilities himself." My curiosity was piqued. Someone else like me? The following week, Mr. Grayson arranged for me to meet Alexander at his consulting firm. Alexander turned out to be intensely charismatic, greeting me with a discerning gaze that seemed to recognize a kindred spirit. Over lunch, he made me an offer. What if I let him train me to develop my gift even further at his firm? His clients, from Wall Street bankers to Silicon Valley moguls, clamored for the type of predictive insights only talents like ours could offer. In return for letting him harness my abilities, he would mentor me one-on-one, helping me strengthen skills I had long kept muted. I realized this was my chance to not only put my gift to real purpose, but to find community with someone whose abilities mirrored mine. No more hiding on the fringes, feeling like an anomaly even in my own family. By joining Alexander and the elite team he had assembled, I could tap into my full potential. Ethan, of course, shook his head in disbelief when I told my family I would be leaving my master's program for this new opportunity. What can a pseudo-psychic's predictions really offer compared to hard data analytics? He scoffed. But under Alexander's expert guidance over the next 2 years, I became a renowned strategic forecaster and consultant in my own right. And for the first time, I felt understood, even celebrated for my singular gift. No one could dispute now that I held something incredibly valuable, and I was ready for my gifts to finally shine bright. Working with Alexander was exhilarating. Together, we put together a crack team of uniquely gifted analysts like myself at his firm, combining our special talents to offer our elite clientele predictive intelligence and strategic insights they couldn't find anywhere else. I realized I had skills I never had reason or opportunity to fully develop on my own before. Under Alexander's mentorship, I honed techniques to not just glimpse, but to actively scry the oncoming currents of consequence, tracing how small events and choices cascaded over time. The more skilled I became, however, the more an uneasiness grew in me. Alexander had always been secretive about who his most confidential clients were, but on certain projects, strings seemed to be pulled from shadows, influence wielded by an ambiguous organization he consulted for. My vision had always operated reflexively before joining Alexander. I saw what I saw organically and intervened when necessary. But now I felt my sight being directed more and more by Alexander for this mysterious entity, honed intentionally on specific targets related to their interests. I confronted Alexander with my concerns. His warm eyes grew flinty. "Iris, you don't need to trouble yourself over the details of our most elite client," he redirected smoothly. "Just know that everything we do helps steer global outcomes towards stability and order. Your mentor, Mr. Grayson, is also aligned with them in these efforts. Surely he explained the importance of the work I've been guiding you towards." I nodded hesitantly. Mr. Grayson had connected me with Alexander for a reason. Perhaps Alexander simply couldn't disclose all the confidential details about his most powerful clients. My former teacher certainly trusted Alexander's intentions in bringing me here. With that tacit reassurance, I pushed down my worries, turning my focus back to honing the incredible abilities I now commanded. Yet whispers traveled in influential circles about the covert organization Alexander consulted for. Rumors spoke of their ruthlessness, vagueness around their motives, and willingness to remove obstacles in their path towards power by any means necessary. The part of my gift that had always been attuned to warning signs bristled anxiously, but I made a choice to ignore it then, spurred by pride over my blossoming talents and trust in the two mentors who had cultivated them. I would come to regret dismissing those inner bells of foreboding that rang. Outside of my work, I started to feel increasingly isolated over the next year. My unusual gifts had always made relationships difficult, but now that I was no longer taking graduate classes or working towards my degree, my social contact narrowed down to just my colleagues at Alexander's firm. So when one of our new clients, an investor named Caleb, began asking me out for dinners and cocktail events after our consultations, I felt both intrigued and hesitant. Would getting closer to a client be overstepping professional boundaries? Yet Caleb was charming, incredibly handsome, and one of the few people I interacted with outside Alexander's closed circle. Against my better judgment, I soon found myself agreeing to date the dashing financier. The whirlwind romance that followed caught me off guard. Caleb showered me with affection and lavish trips away on his yacht and private plane. For once, I ignored the vague unease I felt around Caleb's ostentatious displays of wealth and tendency to steer conversations back to details on projects at work. I had trained my entire life to listen to warnings within, but with Caleb, I quieted them. I had never dated anyone from my insular world who truly understood my gifts before. Surely what I was feeling was merely my own emotional guardedness from years spent feeling like an outcast. But during one particularly blissful trip sitting beachside, I was startled out of my bubble by the sound of Caleb taking a phone call nearby. Through no choice of my own, a sharp vision exploded in my mind's eye as I overheard Caleb confirm covert plans with the dangerous organization Alexander consulted for. Horrifyingly, the plans discussed had to do with neutralizing key political candidates up for re-election in Latin America, ones who posed a threat to the organization's control in the region. I sat frozen, stunned at this betrayal not just from Caleb, but at Alexander's deeper involvement with the entity I had grown increasingly troubled by. I felt sick, unwillingly privy now to ruthless secrets about power plays on a global scale. And realizing I had played right into their hands, my blossoming gifts leveraged with sinister, murky motives by those I had come to trust, I had foolishly ignored all the signs for far too long. I confronted Alexander the next day, shaking with anger and disbelief. How could my mentor have deceived me so completely, using my gifts for the benefit of that dangerous organization? Alexander held up his hands pleadingly. Iris, please try to understand. Some short-term moves needed to be made on the global chessboard to ensure stability, he attempted to reason. What I've opened up for you is power and influence most can only dream of. I felt ill listening to him attempt to justify actions that essentially amounted to political assassinations and strong-arm tactics. The Alexander I had revered would never have condoned ruthlessness like this as an acceptable cost, no matter the ultimate ends. Leaving everything behind, I resolved to have nothing more to do with Alexander or that malign entity that had co-opted our gifts for their own agendas. Caleb attempted to appeal to me as well, but his smarmy charm now only inspired disgust in me. It was time to rebuild elsewhere. But where could I even begin? The one person whose arrogance towards me now gave me hope was Ethan. I reached out to my brother, offering to meet. Perhaps understanding and reconciliation could come from this, if Ethan would even agree to see me. To my surprise, he responded right away, asking me over to his new house. What I found when I arrived made my heart drop. Ethan looked utterly exhausted, his startup now reduced to a struggling shell of what it once was. The scandal years back had broken something in him. His cocksure confidence was gone, replaced by a haunted, hunted look. My strong, dazzling brother seemed like a fading shadow of himself. "Ethan, why didn't you tell us things got so bad?" I asked gently. He gave a mirthless laugh. And admit defeat to my know-it-all sister who warned me this would all crumble? I clearly didn't have things under control like I arrogantly assumed. His voice broke. I'm barely holding the company together as lawsuits and debt engulf me. My heart ached for him. Perhaps together we could find a way through this, after all. I moved back home for a few months to reconnect with my family and help Ethan rebuild. Having abandoned Alexander and his influences behind, I took a step back to focus on how to best use my gifts ethically. I still had my innate abilities, of course, but I wanted to make sure I approached foresight with care rather than through an ambitious hunger for more power over predicting outcomes. However, leaving that world behind proved difficult as Alexander continued efforts to contact me. When I ignored his outreach, he surprisingly reached out to my old mentor, Mr. Grayson, to intervene on his behalf. I agreed to meet Mr. Grayson for old time's sake, hoping he could provide me some context into Alexander's troubling allegiances. Over tea, Mr. Grayson's surveyed me with familiar paternal warmth, but something felt different in his aura I couldn't quite place. "My dear, walk with care when turning your back on friends like Alexander," he warned gently. "That organization serves important purposes, far exceeding our limited perspectives. One day you may realize the necessity of sacrifices for the greater good." I gaped at him. "Mr. Grayson, how can you, who taught me ethics, justify Alexander assisting extrajudicial assassinations?" I implored, aghast. "Who are you truly aligned with?" Mr. Grayson shook his head, almost sadly. "The time has come for you to choose a side, Iris. I suggest you reconsider Alexander's offer before rejecting it outright. A great reckoning is nearing where you will need allies, not more bridges burned." His words chilled me to the core. My beloved mentor was complicit with the very darkness I had fled. Were there no ethical leaders or institutions untainted by this moral rot? Perhaps my trust in others had been fundamentally naive. I saw now I stood very much alone. While my worldview was crashing down, Ethan's spirit seemed revived, having me home again. The brother I loved and remembered was emerging from the shadows, especially once I helped forecast some cunning business pivots that brought his company back from the brink. "We make quite a team," Ethan observed, the old mischievous glint returning to his eyes. "Maybe from these ashes, something good could rise again." I wanted to believe that, even if so much now felt uncertain. Getting distance from Alexander, Caleb, and even Mr. Grayson gave me much-needed clarity. I focused on mending relationships within my family and explored more positive ways I could use my foresight abilities on my own terms. I started consulting pro bono for nonprofit organizations to help them strategize and foresee challenges. The simplicity of using my gifts for straightforward, helpful reasons rather than allowing them to be leveraged for questionable agendas felt right. Meanwhile, Ethan was himself again, playfully teasing me like old times. My parents, too, finally started treating me with warmth instead of wary distance. You know, Iris, that prediction about the supply chain delays ended up saving us from 6 figures in losses. "We're lucky to have you," my dad mentioned one night at dinner. I nearly dropped my fork in astonishment. After a lifetime of my family dismissing my talent, their acknowledgement meant everything. But Alexander continued pressuring me to return. When I declined yet another imploring invitation to meet, he surprised me by offering an eye-watering sum for an exclusive contract, along with a veiled reminder that Mr. Grayson valued loyalty in allies. The old me would have leapt at the prestige and money his offer dangled. Yet now the ethics were clear. I refused again, though anxiety stirred, wondering if they would retaliate. That night, I had a fateful vision that shifted everything once more, one where I saw further than I ever had before, glimpsing actual pivotal nexus points of the future in flux, and my own actions steering events one way or another depending on the choices made. My gift showed me in those glimpses how I might use my sight not just to foresee, but to consciously shape what was to come. The revelation stunned me. I had always thought my foresight was passive, merely glimpsing inevitable futures. But perhaps the gift had evolved somehow during my time with Alexander, expanding into something that allowed me to not just predict, but influence. and with it came a deeper moral responsibility I now needed to grow into. Coming to terms with my newfound ability to actively influence outcomes was equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. The additional responsibility weighed heavily, as did the fear that I could be manipulated again if my powers expanded further. I confided in Ethan first about my evolving gift, wary since he had always been skeptical about the validity of my foresight. But to my relief, he took me seriously rather than dismissing my concerns as he might have just a year ago. "Iris, your abilities are clearly extraordinary, but you've proven you also have extraordinary judgment," he reassured me. "You got me and the company back on track when no one else could." Heartened, I also opened up to my parents one evening. To my astonishment, instead of withdrawing in discomfort as they always had before, they listened raptly, almost like they were seeing me clearly for the first time. "Oh, sweetheart, we knew even when you were small you had a stunning gift," my mom said gently. "We just didn't know how to make sense of it." My father nodded somberly in agreement. "We failed you in helping nurture something so special, but however your abilities grow, we're here for you now." I was moved beyond words by this acceptance from the three people closest to me. Their solidarity gave me new motivation to navigate my expanding powers with wisdom. Perhaps this was the journey I had been hurtling towards my whole life. I just needed the right people by my side now as I stepped into the unknown. Just then, as if responding to this poignant moment, another piercing vision flashed, showing me a pivotal nexus rapidly approaching in 6 months' time, with global ramifications, dependencies branching, my own actions at the crux binding certain events as unavoidable. I came to with Ethan and my parents peering at me concerned. A heavy dread sank into my bones, realizing the immensity of the swiftly approaching crossroads I alone had foreknowledge of. My growth would be tested sooner than I was ready for. The months flew past in a blur as I prepared for whatever pivotal nexus event my power had shown me looming on the horizon. I immersed myself in honing my abilities, setting time aside each morning and night to develop my sight's strength and control. I hesitated telling even Ethan or my parents details. Whatever was careening towards us felt delicate, dangerous even, like the flapping wings of a butterfly triggering a distant hurricane. Meanwhile, Alexander continued reaching out, attempting reconciliation, playing on my sympathies and drive to see the best in those I cared for. His latest appeal took the form of a legal threat should I not return everything I had taken from his firm. While the intimidation tactic angered me, it was also the jolt I needed to steel my resolve. I severed contact completely, focusing wholly on growth both within and mastery over my expanding gift. When the fateful month finally arrived, a rift seemed to open in reality itself as the very fabric of space, time warped around the arrival of the Foresee nexus point. In dazzling visions that poured through the veil, I glimpsed intricate causal threads with countless lives hanging in the balance depending on the outcome to this approaching junction. At the eye of the oncoming storm stood shadowy key figures hoping to manipulate events secretly to further concentrate global power and influence. And opposing them, a small but determined alliance of leaders seeking to upset their careful consolidation plans and turn the tide away from tyranny. The vision pulled back further, to reveal that I held a critical role as a proxy agent that could intervene and shift outcomes to either side at this nexus instant. Both factions likely sought my loyalty now, hoping to leverage my rare gifts. I hesitated, knowing whichever direction history pivoted upon here would have monumental repercussions spiraling centuries into the future. As the nexus point neared, I grounded myself within, finding clarity. Neither side held moral superiority with clear righteousness guiding them and darkness marring them both to degrees. I alone could walk the middle way, using my sight to illuminate truths that served all people rather than the powerful few. The moment arrived. I took a breath, allowed my being to become a conduit of light rather than attempting to bend destiny towards fear or control. And I watched in awe as the temporal waves collapsing into the nexus seemed to still, ceasing their concentration into a weapon for tyrants or saviors. The potency of the instant diffused into reforming potential open to better paths unveiled. My small act of courageous hope and idealism had shaped some greater good, at least for today. Tomorrow's conflict would come, but with heart and sight joined, I would transform it again. For that was the purpose my gifts and visions revealed when I listened beyond reward or threats, a purpose that would anchor and guide me as I fully stepped into who I was always meant to become.